You know, when you think about the Bible's great covenants, the ones with Abraham, David, and the New Covenant, it's easy to see them as separate deals God made over time. It's a pretty common view. But what if they aren't separate at all? What if they're actually three acts in a single epic story that God's been telling from the very beginning?
And that is the big question we're diving into today. The idea that these aren't just disconnected contracts, but chapters in one single story. By the end of this, I think you'll see how these ancient promises weave together beautifully to tell one cohesive story about God's mission in the world.
Okay, so first things first. To really get this, we have to be clear on what we mean by covenant. Now, that word might make you think of a contract, right? A two-way agreement between two equals. But a biblical covenant, well, that's in a whole different league.
Yeah, think of it less like a business deal and more like a royal decree. A divine covenant is this sacred binding promise that is started entirely by God. It's a profound, one-way promise where He sets all the terms and He personally guarantees the outcome. We're simply the recipients of that promise. And this idea, it's the absolute bedrock of God's relationship with humanity through the entire Bible.
So where does this grand story even begin? It all kicks off with one man, Abraham, and a foundational promise from God that really sets the whole plot in motion.
Right here in Genesis, God calls Abraham and makes a promise with absolutely world-changing implications. And just notice the scale of it. It's not just about Abraham and his family. It's global, all the families of the earth. This one promise becomes the seed from which everything else grows.
Now here's what's so cool. That massive promise breaks down into three distinct threads that we can actually follow through the rest of the story. First, you've got the promise of land, a physical place to call home. Second, the promise of seed, countless descendants that would become a great nation. And third, the promise of a universal blessing, a spiritual redemption for all of humanity. So keep those three threads in your head: land, seed, and blessing. They're like the narrative tracks for the rest of our journey.
Okay, let's jump forward in time to the next chapter and see how the plot thickens. Hundreds of years go by and God makes another major covenant, this time with King David. And it picks up one of those earlier threads and really runs with it.
You see, the Davidic covenant isn't a brand new story starting from scratch. No way. Instead, it takes that seed promise that was made to Abraham and kind of puts it under a microscope. It develops the general idea of countless descendants and gives it a very specific royal focus. So, God promises David that his family line, his house, is going to be a permanent dynasty. He promises an eternal throne, which means the right to rule will always belong to one of David's descendants. And he promises an eternal kingdom. This covenant is basically zooming in on the seed promise, revealing that a specific king, the Messiah, will come from David's line.
So the crucial point here is that this isn't a reboot of the story, it's a clarification of the original plot. The promise to Abraham is just being given more detail, more shape. The seed isn't just a big crowd of people, it's going to culminate in a specific royal family with a guaranteed right to rule forever. And that brings us to the climax of the whole story. The prophets, especially Jeremiah, started talking about a coming new covenant. And this wasn't designed to scrap the earlier promises, but to bring them to their ultimate conclusion, especially that third thread we got from Abraham.
And this just brilliantly shows the revolutionary shift the new covenant brings. I mean, while the earlier Mosaic covenant was centered on an external law written on stone tablets, the new covenant is radically internal. It's a promise of a deep, personal transformation, where God's law is written directly on the human heart. It creates a whole new kind of intimate relationship with Him.
And here it is. This is where we see that third thread, the blessing, finally reach its destination. The new covenant is the very mechanism through which the promise to Abraham finally extends to all the families of the earth. It's through that one specific descendant of both Abraham and David, Jesus Christ, that the spiritual blessing of forgiveness and new life is offered to all people from every nation.
Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the whole tapestry now. When you put these three covenants next to each other, the single, unfolding narrative becomes just impossible to miss.
It just lines up perfectly. The Abrahamic covenant lays the foundation, right? It establishes the core promises of land, seed, and blessing. Then the Davidic covenant provides the development, taking that seed promise and building it into an eternal royal kingdom. And finally, the new covenant delivers the fulfillment, bringing that ultimate spiritual blessing to all nations. It's one story told in three major acts.
This grand cohesive plan, theologians have a name for it. They call it the Missio Dei, a Latin phrase that just means the mission of God. It's this idea that the Bible is telling one unified story of God's plan of redemption, revealed bit by bit over time. The covenants aren't disconnected contracts, they are the very architecture of that mission.
So instead of seeing a collection of separate stories and laws and prophecies, we see a single, grand narrative with a clear beginning, a developing plot, and a stunning fulfillment. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. If you start to read the Bible this way, as one interconnected story, how might that change everything about the way you understand its message?